But first, a break-in becomes a murder investigation when officers discover a badly beaten body.
He had face and head injuries and damage to his brain where he'd been beaten inside his house.
And the key to solving it could be underneath their feet.
We had 3 sets of footprints in the crime scene, and this was really, really important.
Andy Tattersall spent 40 years in the police force, eventually reaching the rank of detective superintendent. He's dealt with over 400 murder cases, and for him, good detective work is all about being thorough.
ABC is assume nothing, believe nobody, check everything. There's a D as well, which is detail, detail, detail.
It's a cold February day in Manchester, on a housing estate in Miles Platting, half a mile from the city centre. 2 men have called round on a neighbour.
When they got there, they found that the door was open. They very carefully looked inside. As they went up the stairs, they realised that the place had been absolutely ransacked.
The house belongs to Augustine Madulmizia, a Nigerian man who's been living in the UK for more than 30 years. He works in removals, and the neighbour and his friend are looking for help moving some furniture. But they're about to make a shocking discovery.
She found Augustine dead in the living room. He and his friend called 999, and ambulance and police were summoned to this scene.
The house is immediately sealed off, and the major incident team, led by Andy, are called in.
At that point, it's absolutely essential that that cordon is applied to the flat and no one goes in or out of that flat unless I say. But that would be in full protective gear with mask and clothing, because the last thing I want to do is damage or interfere with that crime scene, because a crime scene of a homicide is the most important evidential tool that you have. Every crime scene will tell you a story.
Andy needs to discover what the story is here.
When we approached, we found that the front door was open, and we noticed that the lock itself had been kicked open and it was lying on the floor. As you open the door, inside the stairway, that's when we saw our first piece of evidence, a pink tissue, which was bloodstained.
The bloody tissue could be the victim's, but Andy's training tells him to consider another possibility.
I then started thinking about the location close to the city and knowing what the canals are like late at night. Drug addicts will be hanging around that area, but they'll also be committing crime. And when you looked at the scene, it was what I started thinking when I looked at the pink tissue was that there's a link there. Is that from a drug addict who's had a fix and then they put a tissue over just to stem the bleeding, drop the tissue?
He makes his way upstairs to the living room.
Of course, the first thing I did was look around the house for pink tissues. It could quite easily be the victims, but I didn't find a single pink tissue. I found loads of white toilet rolls, I found loads of white tissues, but I didn't find a pink tissue.
The tissue was fast-tracked for forensic testing as Andy and the team go over the scene. It looks like a burglary, with items scattered on the floor around Augustine's body.
When we removed the body and conducted the post-mortem examination, we found that he died of head injury, consistent with an assault and attack inside that house. It's then going up a peg, and it then becomes a full-blown murder investigation.
Whoever killed Augustine is still at large, and it's up to Andy to bring them to justice. As he pores over the crime scene, outside, the 2 men who originally found Augustine's body approach police officers.
They brought to the attention of the cordon officer that, well, their fingerprints might be on one of the cupboards inside because they had a look round. So when then became suspicious of these 2 guys. What's this about?
They're asked to provide witness accounts, and one of them has a surprising reaction.
he just broke down. He would not stop crying and crying and crying. He became hysterical and he would not stop crying, which a lot of my team and myself became suspicious. What's this about? And then he eventually said he was looking around in the flat after they'd found the body, and he eventually said that he took some keys. So we've got this man who's a witness, and then he changes from being a witness to, well, he's stolen something. But does that mean he's a killer?
And as detectives question him, there's a discovery in the flat.
We were finding 3 sets of Nike training shoe footprints in the various rooms, the kitchen, the bedroom, and the lounge area. And the lounge area is where poor Augustine was fatally killed.
Of the 3 sets of footprints found, none are Augustine's.
One of the sets of trainers were very small. They were size 6. And they were the ones round the body. Now, I think the average size of a foot in the UK is either 8 to 9. How do I account for the 3 sets of Nike? And in particular, the size 6.
But are any a match for the neighbours, who've already admitted to being in the flat? Andy sends officers to investigate. And what started as a simple break-in is fast becoming a complex case.
It's a very fast-paced investigation. There's lots of pressure coming in on you. We've got to keep on going, keep on going.
Andy hears back from forensics on the tissue found near Augustine's front door.
I recall receiving the call from the forensic science team late on the Sunday night, and the guy from forensic science told me that they've been able to extract a full DNA profile from the pink tissue.
The DNA doesn't match the victim or either of the neighbours. Instead, it belongs to a local man, John Crilly. Andy can discount the neighbours that discovered the body, and police turn their attention to their new suspect.
John Crilly was a heroin and crack addict. We had intelligence that he frequented the city centre of Manchester and that he was always on the towpaths, exactly what we were thinking right from the outset.
How could a tissue with the blood of Crilly end up in the crime scene? Andy looks into Crilly's known associates.
We had information that he and 2 other men were always together, and that one of those men, by the name of David Flynn, was only 5'2", and therefore he would have small feet.
Could these men be responsible for the footprints found at the scene? Andy and his team need to act fast.
So we went full out to get hold of John Crilly. We wanted to get hold of his clothing and trainers as fast as possible, because trainers and footprints can leave a unique impression at a crime scene. Not just the make of trainer, but the actual trainer itself with cuts and in the tread can leave a unique, like a fingerprint, a unique piece of evidence for us.
Andy knows that Crilly is a creature of habit and is found in the city centre most days.
So we pieced that together, we targeted those areas, and we found him. And lo and behold, he was wearing Nike trainers.
But Andy's celebrations are short-lived.
Things don't always run that simple, do they? Because we send John Crilly's trainers off, and they're not a match to any of the 3 sets of trainers in that house.
Andy's frustrated and left hunting for answers. Will he be able to find the trainers and catch the killers?
It was a setback. How can we have such a great breakthrough on the DNA, but we've fallen down on the trainers?
In Manchester, retired Detective Superintendent Andy Tattersall is investigating a suspected break-in gone wrong. A man has been brutally murdered in his own home. Who killed him remains a mystery, but Andy thinks evidence from the crime scene could hold a crucial clue.
We had 3 sets of footprints in the crime scene, one of which was only size 6, and they featured around the actual body itself.
Over a week has passed since the murder, and Andy is more determined than ever to get justice for the victim.
Augustine had a family, that he had 5 children. One of his children was a serving police officer. And we have to speak with his family and reassure his family that we're going to do everything possible and make sure that we do our job.
He has a local drug user called John Crilly in custody after his DNA was found on a bloody tissue at the scene. But the trainers he was wearing when he was arrested don't match the imprints found at the flat. With the custody clock ticking, Andy needs answers. Police start by interviewing Crilly's associates.
This guy said, yeah, that John Crilly had been to the house and that he did have some trainers, but they were hurting him. So he wanted to swap, and he had some trainers, and he swapped Nike trainers with John Crilly.
Police seize the trainers and compare them to 3 sets of treads found at the crime scene.
And sure enough, they came back with the exact match to trainers that had been in the rooms, the 3 rooms, but also there were very small traces of blood, the victim's blood. Augustine Madamesi's blood was on the trainers as well. So we had what we call the golden nugget. We've got DNA linking John Crilly to the crime scene, and we've got trainers which we can link to John Crilly that were at the crime scene and the victim's blood.
In interview, Crilly denies ever being at the flat, but he doesn't have any answers for why his blood was found at the crime scene, or how the victim's blood is on his trainers. John Crilly is charged with murder, but Andy and the team know he wasn't in the flat alone. Who's responsible for the other 2 sets of footprints at the scene? Andy and the team focus on Crilly's known associates. Over and over, the same name keeps coming up.
We then had intelligence that John Crilly was associating with one man, David Flynn, and David Flynn was very short, about 5'2", and therefore he was the man most likely to have a size 6 trainer.
They need to urgently track him down before he can dispose of any potential evidence.
We're also worried about the timescale because we thought, everybody now knows from the 3 addresses that we're looking for Nike trainers.
Andy tracks down and arrests Flynn.
But what have we got against him? All we've got against him is he's a small guy with a close association to John Crilly. But what made David Flynn even more special was a previous conviction which he had a few years before. He got 9 years for an attack on an elderly man.
Flynn's got previous, and the details of that case are eerily similar to Augustine's murder. A break-in and a brutal attack, ending with the victim being beaten around the head.
But what evidence do we have about David Flynn? Yes, David Flynn has got size 6 feet. He's got a horrendous similar conviction, but that's all we've got. The clock was ticking and we were forced to release him.
It's a bitter blow for Andy. He's now convinced that Flynn was involved, and that with his history of violence, it's likely that he, rather than John Crilly, killed Augustine.
This was very, very frustrating. We didn't have the evidence at that time against David Flynn. I need evidence. I can suspect that he's involved, but I need that evidence to charge him.
Could forensics link him to the crime scene?
It's a huge team and everybody's doing different pieces of work. And we had the fingerprint guys working hours and hours all weekend. And that went on for several weeks, looking for these fingerprints.
Meanwhile, Crilly is remanded in prison, awaiting trial.
John Crilly started opening up and saying that yes, he was there, that they did go to the house to do a burglary at the house or potentially rob the guy, but they didn't know he was going to be in. And that when they got inside, it was David Flynn who actually attacked him, and he didn't want any part of that.
It confirms Andy's hunch that David Flynn was not only involved in the burglary, but that his violent streak makes him the likely killer. But he still doesn't have any proof to link him to the crime.
And then suddenly we got a telephone call. We've got David Flynn's fingerprints on items inside that house.
It's the key breakthrough. Physical evidence of David Flynn at the victim's flat.
We might not have got his trainers, but we can put him in there. Fingerprints clearly linking him now to the murder of Augustine Madamizia.
Finally, after weeks of hard work, Andy and the team have their moment of proof.
We've now got the evidence for David Flynn. We are aware there's a third man, but we haven't got that evidence. But what is important is that we can account for the size 6 trainers, the Nike trainers that were actually round the body of Augustine.
David Flynn is charged with murder, and John Crilly with murder under joint enterprise for his role in the death of Augustine Madamizia. They are both found guilty, with Flynn sentenced to 25 years and Crilly to 20. Despite Andy's efforts, the third offender is never found.
It was a difficult case, and I feel that we've got justice for Augustine Madamizia.
But that's not the end of the story. After serving 13 years, Crilly appeals to have his murder conviction reduced to manslaughter.
I think he'll be the first one to admit that he was a heroin and crack cocaine addict, and his life was just out of control, and that's what happened on that fatal day. It was David Flynn who actually attacked him and inflicted the fatal blows to Augustine.
Crilly's appeal is successful, and his conviction is quashed. He admits manslaughter and is released for time served.
The criminal justice system and prison sentences should be about rehabilitation. It rarely is. And what makes this case even more extraordinary was the strange twist of events that then occurred. Way back in 2019, when John Crilly visited London to the Fishmongers' Hall just off London Bridge. But unfortunately, Usman Khan was also attending that meeting with one intent: to kill people for his terrorist ideologies. He went there with a suicide vest, apparently, and weapons, and when he got there, he attacked people. People were murdered by Khan, and he would have carried on and committed more, but for the bravery of 3 men. And one of those men was John Crilly. So we've got a lot to thank John Crilly for, because he was a hero and he potentially did save lives that fatal day.